Member recognized, member from Coquitlam-Lardville.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I am pleased to take my place in the debate on Bill 6, the LNG Income Tax Act. And I'd like to get on the record that I, along with my colleagues on this side of the House, support the development of an LNG industry here in British Columbia. It's an industry, Honourable Speaker, that's been coming to BC for quite a long time. And on this side of the House, we do welcome its development. In fact, Honourable Speaker, we welcome quite a diversified economy. The member that just recently spoke certainly spoke about an economy that I want to talk about, an economy that's diverse and recognizes the wealth of this province. An economy that includes mining, forestry, high-tech, fishing, agriculture, tourism. We welcome on this side of the House and say yes to green technologies and to the creative sector, Honourable Speaker. We also say yes to research and innovation. Because on this side of the House, Honourable Speaker, we recognize that a diverse economy is a resilient economy. On this side of the House, where we recognize that climate change is real, we know that we need to be adaptable and to be able to adjust to new climate realities as they unfold. We know and believe, Honourable Speaker, that the more diverse our economy, the more resilient British Columbians will be. I kind of liken this to the consultation that I will get from my investment advisor. He's really clear with me because I'm by nature a little bit risk averse. And his advice to me, Honourable Speaker, is that I need to have an investment portfolio that is diverse so that I can weather the economic challenges that lay ahead, challenges that are often unpredictable. And diversity is part of that scheme. So does LNG add to our diversity? Absolutely, Honourable Speaker. And it's for this reason that I and my colleagues welcome its development. And so I suppose I do want to stand here and actually wait for it. I know everyone's waiting for this. I want to commend the government for actually bringing forward legislation for debate. We need to be talking about this. And it's time, actually, through this debate and discourse, that we had an honest conversation about what this industry really means to the British Columbia economy. It's time for us to have an honest debate, an honest discussion that's grounded in reality and what is realistically possible. The proponents of this industry have been waiting some time to see what the government would bring forward. The proponents deserve to know what the lay of the land looks like when it comes to how this asset, an asset that belongs to all British Columbians, will be taxed. The communities that are most likely to directly benefit have been waiting patiently as speculators have come to their communities to get ready for possible investment. Communities like Prince Rupert and Kitimat have been waiting, and the speculators have been making life difficult in these communities as they've sucked up all the housing and made it very difficult for those who live there and make their life there to actually fully participate. So I think it's time for us to move this forward. The member from Peace River South yesterday, I think, pointed to this side of the House saying that, that on this side we don't have a plan. And he and I know some of his colleagues are running around this place crowing as if they really do have something to crow about. But, Honourable Speaker, that's really not quite accurate. We do have a plan. Our plan for developing this industry would not be to offer up jobs to temporary foreign workers, people who have no path to citizenship here in British Columbia. Our plan includes jobs for British Columbians, jobs that rightfully ought to be serving our children and our grandchildren, our new immigrants, and our First Nations. Our plan is to be honest with British Columbians about what an honest and reasonable expectation would be of this industry. Our plan, Honourable Speaker, our plan during this debate is to remind this government of the promises it made to British Columbians that we on this side of the House knew was full of empty promises and exaggerated opportunities. And our job and our plan as the official opposition is to hold this government to account and make sure that they do their job to deliver to British Columbians what they promised to deliver. And just to demonstrate that it isn't just the opposition playing it up, Honourable Speaker, I thought I would review a little bit about what the media has been saying about the commitments that this Premier and her Liberal government have been promising to British Columbians for a year and a half. So I've done a little bit of research. So, April 18th, 2013, the Beacon BC News. And I quote, so this is just a month before the election. The export of LNG is worth $30 trillion in economic growth over 30 years, the Premier said at a campaign stop. The Premier told hard hat wearing workers at Langley Concrete in Chilliwack, one example of a business she said would directly benefit from LNG development. In the BC government throne speech that February, the Premier announced a new prosperity fund that would accumulate $100 billion to $260 billion in revenue from LNG royalties and business taxes. And that, Honourable Speaker, she said at the time, was enough to wipe out the province's current debt, because of course at the time it was only $56 billion, it's higher now, and it would eliminate the need for provincial sales tax. And then in June 2013, this one is from the Globe and Mail. The Premier's LNG strategy announced in February of last year, so that would have been February of 2012, was the mainstay of her recent election campaign, calls for 3 LNG plants to be up and running by 2020. The province has said that LNG projects are expected to produce $1 trillion in economic activity over the next 30 years. Then we have another one from the Globe and Mail, this past February. This is from Justine Hunter, and she notes the finance minister will reveal in his provincial budget how his government intends to extract enough revenue from liquid natural gas industry to retire the provincial debt, currently $56 billion and growing. And the story goes on to note that the first LNG dollar isn't expected to flow into the Treasury until the year 2017. The BC Liberals are banking on a string of LNG plants opening up along the coast, with at least 3 online by 2020. The Premier promised on the eve of the May 2013 provincial election that the Liberals will establish a prosperity fund to collect LNG revenues. And the fund would collect up to $100 billion over the next 30 years. The platform promised that the fund would be used to eliminate not just the direct provincial debt, $56 billion at the time and climbing, but also debt for Crown corporations, including BC Ferries and BC Hydro. So now we have the CBC News posting October 5th, 2014. Now we start to see things change a little bit. The fact that the Premier's government is having a fall session this year suggests the importance of the subject matter, which has become very singular, an almost singular focus of late, is the quote. The talk was at the cornerstone of the last election campaign, with its promises of a debt-free BC as a result of hundreds of billions of dollars in potential revenue from the emerging industry. The Times columnist, October 8th of this year. We see again, things are starting to shift a little bit. Liquefied natural gas, the big shiny bauble that the Premier has dangled before voters in the 2013 election, doesn't appear to be so big and so shiny now. In fact, that bauble is looking more like a bubble, with Malaysian energy company Petronas holding a sharp pin. It goes on to note that the Premier has consistently pursued the LNG dream, promising that BC's natural gas will bring prosperity to the province. The industry represents a $1 trillion economic opportunity that she has said will create 100,000 new jobs and the BC Prosperity Fund, allowing BC to erase its debt. In the throne speech, which was the beginning of October of this year, the Premier trumpeting of the LNG was notably muted, says the editorial. No mention of job numbers and no mention of dollar figures. In fact, the editorial goes on to note that the Premier notes that Petronas is just one of 15 potential investors that the province is courting, but there's really no details at all. As we move along, October 21st, we have in the Vancouver Sun, and the headline reads, "Debt-free BC may come later than planned," the Liberals admit. So here we have BC's finance minister, and I'll quote here in this article, admits it may take at least a decade longer for his government to fulfill his big-ticket election promise of a liquid natural gas prosperity fund that will pay off the province's debt. Instead, he said the government's revenue forecasts for LNG, while still substantial, are declining in the face of reduced global LNG prices, changing demand in Asia, and a new BC tax regime that cuts in half the future LNG tax rate. The Premier had promised voters the massive economic windfall from an LNG industry that would fill the newly created fund with a minimum of $100 billion over 30 years, Honourable Speaker. And here again, in this article, where it says, allowing BC to erase its provincial debt, which is now climbing from $56 billion to $61 billion, not so likely to happen. The minister is quoted as saying, if it takes an extra 10 or 15 years to pay down to the extent we'd like or eliminate the provincial debt as a result of these adjusted market conditions or figures, I'll take that criticism. So on the one hand, we have a year and a half ago saying, it's going to be so fantabulous, fantastic, just glorious, elect us. They get elected, and now they're prepared to take some criticism that they just can't deliver. Then we have another article, this one from Renee Filipponi from the CBC News, describing what we have before us in the bill. And in the article, they note that the rate will rise to 3.5% after 4 years, will remain for another 20 years, when a final rate increase to 5% will be instituted in 2037. I did the math. I'll be 73 years old. I'll be as old as my dad. That's a pretty long time to wait. Sorry, Dad, didn't mean to offend you, but that's a long time to wait. So what does the Minister of Finance have to say about that? Well, what he says is that it's a significant reduction in projected revenue for the province. He notes that the province, and so the article goes on to talk about that under original 7% tax regime that was first floated, the province was touting that a medium-sized LNG facility would have brought in $1.5 billion in tax revenue over 10 years. And under today's revised bill, that number changes dramatically to about $800 million. So I suppose it's better than nothing, but it reminds me of a recent experience I had, and if the Honourable Speaker will just bear with me with this example. I have a very small foot, size 5, and when I go into a shoe store and I say, listen, I have a size 5 foot, do you have any shoes that will fit me? And they say, well, no, but I have a size 6. Well, that just doesn't cut it. So when you say to people, when you say to British Columbians, we're going to generate $1.5 billion in tax revenue over 10 years, and then all you have to offer them is $800 million, it just falls short. It just falls short. It's another example of saying one thing and doing another. The Edmonton Journal had something to say a couple of weeks ago about LNG here in British Columbia. And what they write is that the BC government surprised almost no one Tuesday by agreeing to slash tax rates on the province's yet unborn liquefied natural gas industry. The province, they note that if the province didn't cut proposed tax rates on new LNG plants, there would be no plants and thus no BC LNG industry. That was pretty obvious. And even now, after cutting BC's proposed LNG income tax rate in half to just 3.5% from an initially planned 7%, once project-related capital costs are recovered, this author goes on to note that the industry's economics remain dicey at best. And they go on to say that if you add it all up, it's not a particularly bright picture, which is why analysts say BC will be lucky to land 1 or 2 LNG projects at best, not the 5 plants that the Premier and her government have promised. Moving right along, on October 21st, so this isn't just the NDP, Honourable Speaker, saying this. This is what is out there. This is what our media, different media are saying about the government's plans and this bill in particular. In the Globe and Mail, Justine Hunter and Brent Jang, they have some things to say, October 21st. They note that BC has vastly scaled back its expectations for its anticipated LNG riches, in sharp contrast to the political high hopes for the province's fledgling LNG industry that they touted so much during last year's election campaign. The BC Liberal government introduced legislation slashing proposed rates for an LNG income tax and adds tax incentives for LNG companies, meaning the province is now banking on a smaller flow of revenue. So during an election campaign, they go on to note, in the spring of 2013, the BC Liberals touted a plan to retire the provincial debt with a prosperity fund. It's not just us making this up. This is stuff that's out there, Honourable Speaker. And it was, at the time, touted that this prosperity fund would begin collecting revenue from LNG by 2017. The campaign platform stated that the fund would reap as much as $100 billion over 30 years. But the finance minister is now vague about whether there would be such a lucrative fund at all. So, moving along to just before Halloween a couple of weeks ago, or last week, and this is perhaps in some ways some of the most alarming comments. On October 29th, the CBC News reported on a story coming out of the Times of India economic pages. And in this article, they note that the Premier reportedly told the gathering of potential domestic investors in New Delhi 2 weeks ago that BC can help India with its skilled worker shortage. And the promise she made, and this is a quote, "If we can help train 3,000 and 300 of them help us build an LNG industry, it's good for you and it's good for us." So here we have a Premier who is going out to India and inviting people there to work in an industry after promising 100,000 jobs to British Columbians. 100,000 jobs that we now know not likely to materialize. And finally, a more recent Globe and Mail article that comes from Sunday, November 2nd. And in this article, the author writes, "There have been 18 BC LNG projects proposed so far, though industry observers say only 4 at most will come to fruition." The BC Finance Minister tabled his bill that would put an LNG income tax rate of 3.5% on net income once LNG export terminals recover capital costs. The latest plan came after BC LNG players balked at the government's proposal in provincial budget last February to impose a tax rate of up to 7%. So, as opposition, Honourable Speaker, our job is to hold this government accountable to its promises to British Columbians. We are standing in this House and asking, what happened to that prosperity fund? What happened to eliminating the debt? What happened to the 100,000 jobs for British Columbians? Saying one thing and delivering another is what we've been hearing this entire time about the LNG industry. This government has been saying what it needed to get elected, and then it's delivering something else. And this bill is the something else. So I want to talk a little bit about those 100,000 jobs, Honourable Speaker, because I'm the parent of 2 20-somethings, and this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart as a parent. And I've also spent the better part of my career, before I got elected, working with people in my community who were challenged to feed their children without the support of a food bank. Honourable Speaker, I want to see my children benefit from these jobs that this government has promised. I want to see their friends benefit from the jobs that this government has promised. I want to see First Nations benefit from the jobs that this government has promised. And I want to see the people in Coquitlam-Millardville benefit from the jobs this government has promised. Honourable Speaker, when the Premier goes off gallivanting to India and promises to train people there to come here to work in British Columbia, I have to give my head a shake. We have people here in British Columbia who struggle to get enough hours on the job to get their Red Seal tickets. We have plenty of people here in British Columbia. Why would our Premier, the person representing British Columbians, the person representing our children, the person representing First Nations, the person representing new immigrants who are often underemployed, Why would she go elsewhere to promise jobs to temporary foreign workers? We want those jobs for British Columbians, BC workers. We want our young people and those in transition to be able to get the training they need to access those well-paying jobs. We want First Nations, women, old people, young people, those going through a career change, British Columbians for whom English is not their first language. We want all of those people to be first in line for whatever jobs come forward from any investments made in LNG. On this side of the House, Honourable Speaker, we will support projects that include an express agreement, a guarantee for jobs and training opportunities for British Columbians. When the Premier goes to Ottawa and advocates for more foreign workers who can fill these jobs, I have to wonder who she really cares about. Is it the corporations who are looking for cheap labor? What happened to caring for British Columbians? What happened to families first? It's pretty amazing when we have the Minister of Natural Gas mix up refugees, students, provincial nominees, and call them all temporary foreign workers. I call that obfuscation or smoke and mirrors, Honourable Speaker. If we throw all of these categories into the mix and call the opposition racist or suggest somehow that on this side of the House we are anti-immigration, then it can distract from the real issue. The real issue here, Honourable Speaker, is we have a Premier who is making promises all over the place and is leaving ministers and our caucus colleagues to pick up the pieces. I believe that the Minister of Natural Gas does know the difference between all these programs. He knows exactly what the temporary foreign worker program is. He understands the temporary part of the temporary foreign worker program is just that, temporary. He also understands that this is not a path to citizenship as these other programs might be. This is, I believe, Honourable Speaker, a Liberal strategy. Say what you want, do what you want, throw everything into the mix to confuse and disorient. So when we have a government that makes these grand promises before an election of 100,000 jobs, a prosperity fund, debt-free, and then they can't deliver, you wind up with an opposition that says, hey, where's that stuff you promised? We have a bill here before us that just ain't going to deliver on that. So here we are, Honourable Speaker, pointing out that this Liberal government says all kinds of things, makes all kinds of promises, and when the rubber hits the road, they just can't deliver. We started with a 7% outer limit proposal just in February, and it was halved just a few months later. And the rationale, Honourable Speaker? The rationale is that the LNG economic conditions have changed since February. They haven't changed, Honourable Speaker. The economic conditions have been there all along. The evidence that there would be competition and pressure to deliver a realistic, grounded in reality tax bill has always been there. And if this is a surprise to this government, then they really have no idea what they're doing. So what evidence do we have? So we have, in September 2012, the Macquarie Bank wrote a report that doubted that even 4 LNG plants would be built in BC. They predicted that BC will become an LNG exporter by 2020, but they also suggested that delays, cost overruns, and emerging markets were real threats that could undermine the economics of these projects. That was a long time ago, Honourable Speaker. February 2013, when the government first started talking about the Prosperity Fund, including the 100,000 jobs. There was a report by Grant Thornton that used an econometric model provided by the province that produced an estimate. This is very interesting, where 30 indirect and induced jobs were created for each assumed direct job. However, in the US, their House of Representatives, they used a different estimate of 3.5 indirect and induced jobs for every direct job in the US gas industry. So we have this disparity on how you actually do this calculation. Feels like the reality was there, but the notion of 100,000 jobs just felt like the right thing to say. Then in April 2013, at an LNG conference in Vancouver, global energy experts were doubting the credibility of the Premier's optimism. They were saying, Honorable Speaker, that Asian buyers won't be paying the windfall prices that have been in place since Japan shut down almost all of its nuclear power stations after the Fukushima disaster. They noted that Asian buyers will seek to recouple the price of gas from the price of oil, seek to decouple the price of gas from the price of oil, and that BC will face stiff competition over prices, with new supply coming from Africa, the US, and Australia. Sounds like there was evidence at that time, Honorable Speaker. The following month, May 2013, Citigroup warned that we will face increased supply competition after the U.S. Department of Energy approved 26 LNG export facility applications in Texas on the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. Another piece of evidence available for all the members to read about and learn about as they were moving forward with their LNG plans. In October of 2013, Canada West Foundation wrote a report assessing BC's LNG industry. What were they saying, Honorable Speaker? They were saying that Asia may soon have more than enough natural gas of its own. They were saying that BC will face competition from domestic production in China and from pipeline imports to China. And what was the minister saying? I don't mind being accused of being an optimist. Well, his optimism has led us down the Yellow Brick Road. And now we're in the land of Oz. And now they've had to click their heels 3 times. And reality has struck. Reality is there is no prosperity fund. There is no debt-free BC. And British Columbians have been fooled into believing that, Honorable Speaker. In April 2014, the Japanese government revised its energy plan and indicated that it would be restarting its nuclear power plants once they clear new safety standards. Well, there goes that market. They were warned, but there goes that market. So what else do we have here? We actually have quotes. So if the government wasn't interested in doing that kind of research, there's a few quotes here that was just in our local media, and that should have been enough. Just reading some of our of Vancouver Sun, a Vancouver Sun article, April 4th, 2013. They note, British Columbia could generate long-term profits by exporting liquid natural gas to Asia. But current government predictions for the value of the sector are too optimistic, according to global energy experts gathered this week in Vancouver. Delegates to an Asia-Pacific Foundation Energy Summit heard that the current price for natural gas in Asia is in the range of $18 US per unit compared to a price around $4 in North America. An Asian price around $6 may be more realistic before processing and transport charges are factored in. Seems clear to me. You didn't have to go and do digging to do the research. You just had to read your newspaper that appears at your front door that day. The Citigroup in May 2013, they noted, the managing director and the global head of commodities warned in 2013 that Canada risks ceding market share to the U.S. Pacific as exports of LNG from the Gulf of Mexico ramp up. We also heard from Canada West Foundation. They did a report that also noted that the opportunity for BC to supply Asian markets with LNG is solid but not guaranteed. Projects will face competition from each other, from domestic production in China and from pipeline imports. Honorable Speaker, so the only thing that's really changed, because there was lots of evidence, the only thing that's really changed is that the Liberals had an unrealistic expectation. Now they have to deliver, and the only thing that's changed is that they have to be honest. On this side of the House, we recognize that LNG is an important addition to a diverse British Columbian economy, and it's too important to screw up, Honorable Speaker. On this side of the House, we want 4 things from LNG, just 4 things to serve British Columbians well. Development must include express guarantee for jobs and training opportunities for British Columbians. We must get a fair return in BC. Development must involve and benefit First Nations, and development must protect our land, our air, and our water, including living up to our climate commitment. Honorable Speaker, this is not rocket science, and it's about being consistent. It's about saying what you mean and mean what you say. It's about living up to your commitments. It's about being honest with British Columbians. It's about doing your homework. Honorable Speaker, It's what all British Columbians deserve.